Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Rachel Patton, Executive Director of Preserve Arkansas. Preserve Arkansas is the only statewide nonprofit advocate for historic preservation. Welcome to Women in Preservation, the series that features women from all over the country who are working to save historic places. Thank you to DMX Architecture of Fayetteville for their generous support of the Women in Preservation series. And many of you are already members of Preserve Arkansas, and if you are, we thank you for your support. If you're not already a member, I'd like to invite you to formally join us for as little as $50 a year. Your memberships provide so much to support to Preserve Arkansas and allow our organization to continue the important work of saving Arkansas's historic places. You can learn more and join at preservearkansas.org. We are now accepting nominations for the 2024 Arkansas Preservation Awards. The awards recognize outstanding preservation achievements, people who are an inspiration in their communities, and projects that inspire others to protect Arkansas's special historic places. You may learn more and submit a nomination on our website at preservearkansas.org before the end of August. And you're invited to join us for our next Mid-Century Modern Tour in Hot Springs on September 27th and 28th. This tour will feature the work of Hot Springs architect I. Granger McDaniel, who reshaped much of the built environment of Hot Springs in the mid-20th century. More information and tickets are available on our website. And please join us next month on September the 10th for our next Women in Preservation talk by Natalie Biles, lead designer and owner of Shine Interior Design Studio in Lone Oak. And now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Key Fletcher. A native New Orleanian, Quantia M. Fletcher, affectionately known as Key, makes it her mission to ensure that the beauty, value, and significance of the African American experience in Arkansas is curated and celebrated. She currently serves as the director of the Mosaic Templars Cultural Center, MTCC, a museum of African American history in Little Rock, after serving 8 years as deputy director. Key joined MTCC prior to its opening in 2008 and has helped develop the Cultural Center into the only state-funded Black History Museum in Arkansas. She received her Bachelor of Arts in Journalism and Master's in English, Folklife, and Southern Culture from Northwestern State University in Natchitoches, Louisiana. Key's outstanding leadership has been recognized by Arkansas Money and Politics, the Women's Foundation of Arkansas, and Arkansas Business. She is the first Arkansan to serve as an American Alliance of Museums Commissioner. Key is a member of Leadership Greater Little Rock Class 30 and serves numerous boards and organizations, including the Arkansas Food Hall of Fame, Life Quest of Arkansas, the Greater Little Rock chapter of Jack and Jill of America, Arkansas Black Philanthropy Collaborative, Arkansas Women's Leadership Forum, and the Downtown Little Rock Partnership. She is a wife, mom, and entrepreneur. In her spare time, she enjoys working out and meal prep. Welcome, Key. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you all so much. I'm so excited to be here today to be sharing with you my history and my story through preservation. I'm always excited to be able to weave things together that I love. So absolutely talking about who I am and where I'm from and weaving the story of how I got there through preservation of African American history and culture is definitely exciting to me. I am not shy when it comes to talking about myself or my family or the work that I've done, because I realize today how so very important it is for us to use our voices. And so you'll hear me sharing a lot about that through this preservation, through this story, through this walk, this journey in my history. So sit back, relax, continue to do whatever you do as I share Preservation is my jam. I do want to say before I get started, everybody, that I will be giving out prizes for comments and questions in some of the areas. So don't be shy about knowing and answering some of those questions. And you could receive some pretty cool Mosaic Templars swag. And so Rachel will be handling that aspect of our presentation today. If you have not had a chance to do this before or actually listen to some of the resources and information, this preservation talk really is a journey, but I really also want to encourage you to ask questions at the end. And let's get this show on the road. So first, if you have not had the opportunity before to visit, I want to encourage you to visit my space where I am today, Mosaic Templars Cultural Center. We're all located in downtown Little Rock. Our mission is to preserve, interpret, and celebrate Arkansas's African-American history and culture. So one might ask, how did I become the executive director of Mosaic Templars Cultural Center? I mean, Rachel did say, after all, that I am a New Orleanian. So how did I get all the way to big Little Rock, Arkansas from the big easy? I would like to say that it started somewhere around here. So I feel like there may be a lot going on in this picture, but go with me on this journey. I can recall being about 7 or 8 years old, and it was the play for school. You guys know that play. It's the holiday play, the Christmas play, where all the kids are in the cafetorium. You all know what the cafetorium is. It's the cafeteria, auditorium merged together. And I'll never forget, I was a little reindeer. And I was on stage with all my other classmates. It was 6 p.m. All the parents had crowded into the cafetorium right after work or whatever else they had been doing for the day. And I was so proud. I saw my mom. From the back of the room, my mom looks at me and she gave me that something ain't right look. You all from the South know exactly what I'm talking about. It's that Southern mama, something ain't right. Uh-oh, you've done something wrong look. And I'm thinking to myself, Mom, we've practiced like for months for this. My hair is still pressed and straight. I haven't messed anything up. I'm all neat. I got my little reindeer antlers on and I'm just looking so cute as a button. So my mom makes a beeline to the front of the stage and she calls my name. There's about 60 kids on stage and she calls my name. And my name is Quantia Mills. So my maiden name is Mills. And so I'm looking and I'm thinking, okay, what does she want? She puts her hands on her hips. She leans forward and she does this motion. And I think I'm in big trouble now. So I weave through the middle and I am center stage and all the other parents are looking at my mom and the kids are like, ooh, she in trouble. She gonna get it. And my mom looks at me and she says, you need to be in the front where I can see you. And I was thinking, I mean, my name starts with M, so I'm supposed to be in the middle. That's how my teacher, Miss Ray's, the music teacher, did it. I'm supposed to be in the middle. And my mom tells me, I don't care what Miss Ray said. Nobody puts baby in the corner. If you've ever seen Dirty Dancing, you already know that that's what Johnny said. Well, after this day, Johnny no longer said that. That was my mama's phrase. I feel like Johnny took that from my mom. So my mom pulls me to the front in front of everybody. And you should have seen the look on Miss Ray's face. From that day to now, I laugh. I love telling that story because it challenged me. It really was an awkward moment, but my mom was Johnny. Every chance my mom got to celebrate her kids, to show us how special, to show us how important we were, we did. And so I feel like that was really the start of me developing my voice, me being really confident and me making sure that it was important to know that I should stand out front, because at that time, I really was not a kid who would do something like that. And so my journey continued using my voice, standing out front in middle school. I was entered into a competition. And this is where the Black history piece comes into it. I had a teacher, she knew I was an avid reader. and that I was really great at writing. And so she suggested that I enter the Black History Month competition. I was a little nervous. I didn't really know what I would do or say, but Mama was right there to help me. And I created a poem that was called A Journey of Excellence in Legacy. And it was about the history of African Americans through the Middle Passage coming into the New World as enslaved people. I didn't know what was going to happen with that presentation, but you guys can see right there in that photo with the red on, that was before my presentation when I won third place. Students across the city submitted, and my poem came in third place. I was super nervous as I practiced, but I said my poem over and over and over. And my mom encouraged me, and she said, I want you to practice until you don't need a paper. And that day, as I stood up in front of a room full of proud parents and friends, as I gave my presentation, I had my paper with me because it was a requirement, but I didn't need it because I had gotten so good at saying what was in my heart that I didn't need the paper. And it's interesting now as I think about preservation and the work that I do, who knew that all of these things, all these series of what I would think was happenstance or circumstantial would turn into what was really laying the legacy, a foundation in the preservation of African American history, and that I will continue to use my voice to do that work. And of course, the picture at the top is me continuing to use my voice, practicing until I no longer needed the paper. And one of the things, again, that I absolutely love to do all the time is talking about Black history and using my voice at any opportunity, at any juncture that I'm able to do that. So one of the ways that I preserve our history and culture consistently is through the continual perfection of my craft. And so when I was young, I thought to myself, I am going to be a journalist. Anybody who knows me knew that when I was young, I was going to be a journalist. I watched Hoda Kotb and all the folks on New Orleans television, and that's exactly what I thought I was going to be. So for a long time as a kid, I did speech, I did debate. As you all heard Rachel say, I mastered and I got my undergrad in journalism, and I thought that is exactly what I'm going to be. I'm going to be like Hoda Kotb, and that's what I'm going to do. That is absolutely not what happened. Clearly, after I finished my undergrad degree and I got my internship, I discovered that that is not what I want to do. And so here I was trying to figure out my goal, trying to figure out my purpose, trying to figure out where I fit in the world. And I really found myself at a crossroads and not really sure what was going to happen next. I'm gonna put a pin in that story for now. But one of the things that, again, I've consistently done is worked on the preservation of my craft through using my voice. And it's one of the things that I encourage my daughter to do today. And it's one of the things that I think that is important, especially when we think about our legacy, when we think about the preservation of whatever it is. Yes, I work in the preservation of history and culture, but even those out there who are not working in those areas, how are you preserving the legacy of whatever it is you're passionate about? Whatever it is you're called to do. For me, one of the important things is to continue to do what my mom did. So at every opportunity, at every chance, I want to make sure that I am making sure that my daughter has a voice and that she's using her gifts and her skills to continue to preserve our legacy, but continue to specifically preserve the African American legacy and experience. And this is her at some Juneteenth things. I think this was probably Juneteenth 2 years ago, and then she did a speech competition for Jack and Jill. So I'm always encouraging her to get out there and make sure that she's doing that. So one of the things that Rachel did not mention is that I was in the military. I don't share a lot about the military because it was like a short blip in my experience. But one of the things I can remember is going through basic training and boot camp. And I went through boot camp 2 times, y'all, 2 times. So clearly, naturally, why I like to work out and I do those things. This is really not my jam. Preservation is my jam. And I knew that. I went through boot camp one time and I was in the 6th week and I got hurt. I called my mom. I said, Mama, I am hurt. I don't think I can do this Army thing. She said, well, didn't you join the Army so you could go to school? I was like, yes, ma'am. She said, well, what's wrong with you? I was like, my leg hurts. I have shin splints, stress fractures. They said I can stay, but I want to come home. I was 18 at this time. My mama said, baby, if they broke you, let them fix you. And my mom made my butt stay and complete and go through basic training and boot camp. God, that was the hardest thing. So I went through boot camp 2 times, but the strength and determination and courage that it gave me to let me know that I could do anything is actually what helped push me along. And I'm so grateful that I did, because it helped me pay for college, and it helped me to get to Northwestern State University, which is my alma mater. Not the big Northwestern, the little Northwestern in Natchitoches, Louisiana. This is where I got my undergraduate degree, and this is also where I got my master's degree, and this is where I met the love of my life, my husband, Derek. We actually met, funny story, we actually met in ROTC. So I did continue into the military, met in ROTC. He continued on with the military, and I decided to leave the military actually 1 week before I was deployed to go to Iraq. IETS, my time in service was up. So this is where I continued my work and really honed my skills and realized that there was something there as I scratched the surface with preservation. After I finished my undergraduate degree at Northwestern, the funniest thing happened. Someone walked up to me, and I kid you all not, literally asked me if I wanted a job working for the National Park Service. I had no clue what the Park Service was. So often in many communities, we don't have a chance to have exposure to things. And so a lot of times we're really not aware of all the amazing opportunities that exist in our country. But I'm so fortunate that someone came up at that time. I didn't know her, but she would soon be my boss, and asked me if I wanted a job. One of the things she looked at was my consistency. She saw me in the gym working out, working hard, and she said, if you're consistent at this, I believe you can be consistent at this job. So she gave me a job because she saw me every day in the gym, y'all. And this was like I was maybe 23 or something like that. Little did I know that her giving me a job and giving me the opportunity to work at the National Park Service would absolutely change my life. It was the first time that I had really heard a lot about the Park Service. I heard about the Grand Canyon, all these big parks, but Yellowstone, but I had never heard that there was a national park site in this small town in Natchitoches, Louisiana, let alone that there are thousands of national park sites across the country. In Louisiana, the national park site that I worked for is Cane River Creole National Historic Park. So this park runs along the beautiful Cane River. It's absolutely gorgeous. The park has 2 sites, 2 plantation sites. It tells the most complete story of the antebellum community in terms of Creole culture in the country. It has 2 complete plantations, over 44 acres, 200 years of plantation life. It's absolutely amazing. I think one of the things that I love the most about working here is the fact that both grounds were so intact. And it did tell one of the most complete stories that I've seen of enslaved community. And what do I mean by that? Not only was the big house still there and relevant, but a lot of the buildings that we don't often see or hear about were there. So a pigeonnier, which was a place where pigeons laid eggs and where a lot of the family got their food. There was a lot of farm equipment that was still there. There were a lot of outbuildings where you roasted and smoked items. There was there was the main store, right? The company store that was there, while oftentimes the enslaved community was. When we talk about from enslavement to the mechanization period, the other thing that really makes this property and this story unique is that the families consistently lived there through the antebellum era, even through the 60s. So you have communities of enslaved and then sharecropping, tenant farming, and free people, both enslaved and people who are the descendants of the owners of the property living there for a really long stretch of time. And so the story that was told there was really challenging. As a young person who had learned a little bit about slavery, but not a whole lot, I really struggled with how to tell the story because at that time, even with the National Park Service, the complete story of what it meant to be an enslaved person, specifically in the South, was not being shared in totality. And so I found myself walking on the beautiful grounds and land, but I found myself continuously being pulled to the company store, to the enslaved cabins, and I found myself really feeling connected and really falling in love with telling the story of the African American experience from the antebellum period. One of the things I want to ask us and I want to challenge us to think about are, what are the things that we're holding space for when we think about the past? As I reflect on my time with the National Park Service, I think about the preservation, the consistent, deliberate preservation that was taken to make sure that the big house and some of the other buildings were taken care of. A lot of the things that I didn't hear or see talked about or protected very often, or space being held in terms of preservation for, were the names of ancestors that were enslaved on this plantation. People who, many of them, had no last names that were documented. People who were why this very space still existed today. Their names were not said, their stories were not told. And so I think to myself, even now, we were holding such space for the buildings, but we weren't holding space for the people that created the buildings. So even now in my work in preservation, one of the things I always am really adamant about with my team is, hey, how do we make sure that we don't forget the past? Make sure that we don't forget the people who are the reasons why we're here today, who are the reasons why we have a Mosaic Templars Cultural Center. And so even as you are doing preservation work, even as you're moving about your community, I want you to think about, how are we holding for the past? Even those, your ancestors that are not here, your relatives, your family members, how are we consistently making sure that we have not forgotten about them? So the names that you'll see here are names that have been documented. If you go to the National Park Service for Cane River Creole, to their site, you'll see tons of names. I actually got caught up. It took me a while just to do these, but I really wanted to make sure that we just took a moment to look at the names, to honor the names, to remember the people who actually were the reason why we actually have much of our country, but specifically this space that was Oakland Plantation and also Magnolia Plantation. The plantation was founded in 1785. It's a Spanish style era, and it was founded by the Prudhomme family. And there were hundreds of documented enslaved that came from both Oakland and Magnolia Plantation. And then this is another list of names. I just wanted to share the names and honor those, or who oftentimes don't see their names acknowledged. And so I really appreciated the work that I did here. I thought that I would work for the National Park Service forever. I really did. I thought that specifically I could work for this site forever. I think I really found my niche and felt like this was my calling. This was absolutely what I was supposed to do. So much so that I was so fortunate to move on and actually work for Central High National Historic Site. That is how I got to Little Rock. It was during the time of Hurricane Katrina, and my stepdad is from Blytheville, Arkansas. And so my family thought, oh, we'll just go to Blytheville for a little bit until things blow over. At that time, my husband and I were still in school. Once we finished school, we were like, okay, what are we going to do? New Orleans is not New Orleans right now because things were in such disrepair. And so my mom said, hey, why don't you all come here to Arkansas where we are? So we went back and forth, and I was so fortunate to get a job at Central High National Historic Site. And so that is how I landed in Little Rock. I had grown up seeing the images of Ruby Bridges desegregating schools in New Orleans. Believe it or not, fun fact, it was my dream job to actually work at Central High National Historic Site. So it was pretty cool that I actually got a chance to be there during the 50th commemoration of the desegregation of Central High with the Little Rock Nine. I worked there for a year. And even when I think about the idea of moving from antebellum rights to civil rights, I would actually argue that I didn't move from antebellum rights to civil rights, because even the idea of civil rights is connected to the story of the enslaved in our country. And many of those, even today, we're telling their civil rights stories, but a lot of their civil rights stories have been told for hundreds of years in our culture of what it means to not be necessarily treated with all of the rights that we're given because we are citizens of the United States. And so it was a really amazing opportunity to work for Central High. And I love it. It's a beautiful place. If you haven't had a chance to visit, I want to encourage you. Okay, so here's where some points will come in. If you can share with me, if you can drop in the chat any of the people who are on these photos, 2 of them are these are civil rights leaders that I've had the opportunity to meet and visit with. Now in that bottom picture, that's me as the education director at Mosaic. Famous people in that picture. But in the top corner, somebody is portraying a famous Arkansan. And so if you know any of these folks and you can drop it in, Rachel and I will make sure that you get a really great swag prize gift from the Mosaic Templars. And so I left Central High and I started working at Mosaic Templars Cultural Center as the director of education before the museum opened, which was really great. I just come to Arkansas and was still learning. And so the opportunity to really learn more about Arkansas was something that I was definitely interested in. The opportunity to learn about Mosaic Templars was confusing to me in the beginning, I gotta be honest. I was like, Mosaic, is that like Masons? Is that some type of secret society? Not quite sure what that is, but the idea of continuing to work in African-American history and culture, again, I felt like I was carving out this niche, right? This area that I was supposed to be doing consistently in terms of my career work and the things that I love. I worked as education director here for quite a while. I helped to develop a lot of the programs that we have at Mosaic Templars. It's interesting, I tell people even today, there's been quite a change, definitely in a good way, in the way that we tell the stories here. The people that initially preserved the original building, that was the MTA building, the Mosaic Templars of America building, I've had the opportunity to meet with them and to work with them and to hear their stories about what they hoped this museum would be, and to allow them for them to still be around to see a lot of the transformative work that we've done over the past 15 years has really been quite an honor, and the pleasure has absolutely been all mine. If you're not familiar with the Mosaic Templars of America and quite what I'm talking about, the Mosaic Templars of America was an organization that was founded by these 2 men that were absolute geniuses, John Bush and Chester Keats. They founded an insurance company in the late 1800s. That time, it was almost impossible for African Americans, when we talk about those civil rights, for African Americans to obtain their burial insurance. So they started what would soon be an insurance company. It was quite common within African American communities at that time to have these types of fraternal organizations that served as insurance companies. They opened theirs in the heart of what was the Black business district in Little Rock. And what started out as an insurance company here in Little Rock grew to be an international organization in 26 states and 7 countries. They had a nursing school, a hospital, a publication, a savings and loan. And some of these artifacts are some of the items that are just documents that share what that building was. Booker T. Washington gave the opening day speech in 1913 when the building was erected right here at the corner of 9th and Broadway. So again, it's just such an amazing story that we continue to tell here at the museum. And it's why we are who we are. So as we think back even further about that Black business district that we think about here, or what was at that time, of John Bush and Chester Keats, we have to think prior to that. Here goes my antebellum, my Civil War information as well. But this area in Little Rock was a popular place, for a very common place for African Americans at that time to settle. And so these are some images that we have that document what life was like for African Americans before we think about what downtown Little Rock looked like, right? What the community looked like in the 1920s during John Bush and Chester Keats era, but also quite different of what it looks like now. After the Civil War, these areas were safe places. African Americans felt that these places were safe. This is where the community began to build up with a lot of the churches. A lot of those who mustered out of the military began to settle in this area. And slowly we began to see community build. You also not only have African Americans who are in this area coming and flocking to this place as a place of safety and refuge, but you also have African Americans from across the country who are coming to this area because they're hearing that this is a pretty progressive area for African Americans at that time. And pretty quickly that begins to change. And here are some other images of the original building of 9th Street of the Mosaic Templars, the founders of Mosaic Templars with others who are members of the organization, and photos of what 9th Street was like. We actually had an interesting conversation today with the team about place and does place matter and the importance of place. As I about my work and my lifelong work that I've been doing now for over 20 years in Black history and culture and preservation, I often ask myself, how important is place and does place matter? You know, what would happen? What would have happened if many of these buildings that we see in the photos, that we hear about, you know, how these businesses were jumping, how they were productive, how there was music, there was art, there were laundromats, there were restaurants. What would have happened if we didn't see such racial hatred, if we didn't see the emergence of Interstate 630, if we didn't see this process of urban renewal happening around our country? What would our country look like? What would our community look like? What would our towns look like? What would we look like? What would the story that we tell, how would it be impacted? How would it be different? And so we have the demise of the Mosaic Templars of America in the late 1920s. Again, we see urban renewal happening a little later to that. But we also begin to see people moving out of the areas, out of the communities. And we see interstates pop up again, not only here in Little Rock, but we see interstates pop up intentionally across the United States, which ultimately destroys a lot of our urban areas where our Black community was thriving. So for our museum, we're fortunate that in the 80s, we have a group of people, of concerned citizens who really understand the importance of the story that we're telling. And these photos are some of the images of our preservation society that came in the 80s and the early 90s and really said, hey, this is something, this building is important, this place matters. And the fact that we know as people that oftentimes where our minds and ideas sometimes change, right? Thoughts and policy and processes do not. And preservation is a long, arduous process, and you have to be really consistent and diligent about the work because it matters not only to us, but it matters to the community and it matters to our legacy. And the Mosaic Templars Building Preservation Society understood that, and they did the work to save the original structure that was the Mosaic Templars building. In the middle with myself and the two people I have, we have Carl Miller and then Constance Sarto. Constance was the first director of the Mosaic Templars. Her husband is John Bush, one of the descendants of the founders of the Mosaic Templars. And then we have just some of the other people who were really boots on the ground doing the work to preserve it. I'm so fortunate that I was able to sit in meetings, able to sit in team meetings and advisory board meetings with a lot of the people that are in this building before the building was built and able to hear their stories and learn about how difficult it really was to preserve the building, how there were people who felt that the building, that the history was not worth preserving, how there were people who felt like there were other spaces that were more important to preserve, how people felt like they didn't want to spend their money on the work to preserve the Mosaic Templars of America building. But even after the building was preserved, and they fought hard and endured long, the building burned down. Most of you all who are from here or have been in the museum remember the story of transients coming into the space, starting in a fire and burning the building to the ground. Huge pieces of metal frayed, never to be restored. And so as people who do preservation, as someone who loves preservation, who came from the National Park Service background, for me, I was not here at this time, but hearing the stories, I could not imagine what it must have been like to work in the space, to work really hard for 10, 15 years, and for the space to be completely destroyed and crumbled, a space that was built by two previously enslaved gentlemen, right? So what happens? What happens? How does the story change, right? How do we continue to tell the story even though the building has burned and nothing is left? How do you continue to tell stories of places that are not there? How do we continue to tell the stories of African Americans in Arkansas when the buildings that were once there have been destroyed? And so that's a story that we talked about this earlier today in our power hour. How do you continue to tell those stories when the buildings are no longer there, when the people are no longer there, when the community is no longer there? Is the building the most important piece when we think about preservation? Are there other things that can be preserved? And how do we merge those two to still make sure that there's a viable piece of history for the community and for legacy? And for those that worked with the Mosaic Templars Cultural Center in the state of Arkansas, that's exactly what they decided to do. That's exactly how they continued to persist. So they did something that I'll be honest, I was younger, that I had never really heard of, taking an original structure and recreating it, a faithful facsimile, a replica of the original structure. Mind you, this building is over 100 years old, so it's not exactly the same, but a lot of the original structure, the pressed tin ceiling, the suspended mezzanine, the first floor being used for drugstore, which is now our guest services. The annex was added on. So a lot of the preservation, a lot of the story that was there, the state of Arkansas, through persistent work of the Preservation Society, was really diligent about making sure that the building was not something different, but that it was a beautiful replica. And so we still have people who come in today who can't believe that it looks so close to what the original structure looked like. And so the grand opening was definitely something to cheer about in 2008. It was definitely a special moment. But how do we continue to create culturally relevant spaces? How do we continue to tell the story? How do we continue to make sure that it's remembered? So the story that we tell is through cultural heritage, through making sure that we are trying our best and hardest to preserve the stories of those who lived on 9th Street, who lived in spaces similar to 9th Street in Pine Bluff, in Helena, in Jonesboro, and Hot Springs, to use our story as a jumping off point, to use the Mosaic Templars as a starting point, to use ancestors previous to that, those who were enslaved, as a starting point, but to make sure that through this space that is a replica, that we're telling the stories of all African Americans in Arkansas, which I have to be honest is a pretty lofty task and goal, because there's a lot to share, but we're just getting started when it comes to preserving Arkansas's African American history and culture. Some of the ways that we continue to preserve it, not only through space, but through the work that we do, is through engagement. One of the big things that we do yearly is preservation through engagement and festivals. We hold one of the largest Juneteenth festivals in our state. It is absolutely a way to continue to remind people that the stories are still here and that preservation is important, and preservation of not only space, but the history and the preservation of culture is also important. These are some of the ways that we've done that. Tons of profits that we've worked with, festivals, other museums, you name it. If someone wants to work with us in terms of preservation and celebrating Arkansas's African American history, whether it be a school or a nonprofit or a hospital, we're all about making sure that we're consistently preserving the story. Here are a few photos of Juneteenth. It's a big endeavor. Most of you on here, if you know me, you probably work with us in some form or fashion in terms of preserving our legacy through Juneteenth. When we think about Juneteenth here, specifically in the Little Rock area, a lot of the early Juneteenth celebrations happened with people that were members of the Mosaic Templars of America. And so again, continuing to tie in those stories, the churches, the schools, the political officials and leaders here in Little Rock at that time when they began celebrating Juneteenth after slavery was over in 1865, it was happening in this community, in this area. So it means a lot to us to look back every year and to see 9th Street filled with vendors, over 100 entrepreneurs, business owners, really continuing to revitalize and tell the story of African Americans in Arkansas, very similar to what their ancestors did over 100 years ago, over 140 years ago now, actually, with events like Juneteenth. And so for me, it's really powerful that every year it makes sense that the museum continues to host Juneteenth. So this year was our 14th year, I believe. And so with festivals, what we hope to do and continue to do is preserve spaces, preserve story. This is if you all have never been, it's the Bristol Rhythm and Blues reunion that took place in 2001. And it started as a tiny festival in Bristol. And now, if you look now, over 33,000 people show up for Bristol. So much so till now they actually have a museum. And so we kind of want to do the opposite, but we want to continue to revitalize 9th Street, to revitalize our history. And research shows us that it is possible through things like festivals and community engagement to reinvigorate an area, to continue to tell a story. Thousands of people show up to Bristol every year for their annual festival. How are we continuing in other ways? We just had our grand reopening in December. Y'all know we like to have a good time. This was our reception that we hosted in the middle, and then the 2 photos on the outside are images of our celebration of the hard work over 5 years, even during COVID, that we did to make sure that we had completely renovated spaces. $3.5 million the museum was able to raise to completely remodel, reinvigorate, and continue to tell the same stories, but in a way that is more interactive, in a way that allows us to continue to expand the scope across the state of Arkansas, kind of not be so Little Rock centric in terms of some of the stories, but also, again, tell a few other stories like music. We're able to tell more stories about music, and people like Sister Rosetta Tharp were able to talk more about sports. We have an interactive space where people are able to use AI to talk with civil rights heroes and legacies. We've got a new children's gallery. So again, we were able to really take what we have learned over the past 15 years and build and create on something that was already there, but in a dynamic way for the state of Arkansas. Of course, I cannot do it without the fabulous team at Mosaic Templars Cultural Center. One of the things that I always like to remind people is to surround yourself with an awesome tribe. Surround yourself with supporters, not only supporters that are your team, but people who care in the community. If not for supporters in the community and the team here at Mosaic Templars Cultural Center, there's no way that we could continue to preserve, interpret, and celebrate Arkansas's African American history and culture. You know, one of the greatest stories that I like to think about in terms of coming together collectively as a team is the March on Washington. When we think about the March on Washington, of course, we think about Dr. King, right? But we don't think about always the backstory that actually went into that. I knew the story before, but I love the fact that Bayard Rustin, that I think it was Netflix just recently did. If you haven't had the chance to watch it, go and watch it, but a story about his life. But essentially, when we think about the work of preservation, oftentimes we know that there's some things that we have to do. We definitely have to be open to evolving and change. I mean, think about the Mosaic Templars and the Preservation Society. Their structure literally burned to the ground. The worst fear of your preservation is that the building burned. March on Washington, Bayard, he initially thought that it was something that he was going to do on his own, but he couldn't do it. He had to go and pull together the Big Six. He had to go and pull together other civil rights leaders, other community leaders, to be able to get the March on Washington done. Whitney Young, he had to pull in John Lewis, he had to pull in Roy Wilkins, James Farmer, all these individuals. And even then, it still was not enough, because on the day of the March on Washington, he had to go back and pull in leaders like Daisy Bates, women. Bayard Rustin had to take a backseat to a lot of his thoughts and ideas in order to make the March on Washington happen. So when we think about the work of preservation, we know that oftentimes we can't do it alone. But if you collectively surround yourself with other people, people that have inclusive ideas, people who oftentimes think different than you, being open to evolve, being open to change, these are the ways that we're able to make sure that preservation still happens. Again, we had this conversation today about moving historic structures into other areas. Is that something that you do in terms of preservation? If you're able to save the structure, does it make sense to move? And so thinking through ideas of preservation, these are some of the areas I think moving forward that we have to be open to as preservationists. We also have to be open to making sure that there are seats at the table for other people. When we look at African-American history and culture, when we look at those in the field of museums who have boards, who have endowment boards, who have seats, who have nonprofits, there is such a small representation of African-Americans when we think about CEOs and board members. And so again, it takes surrounding yourself with people who are different. And so those of us who have opportunities, those of us who are able to speak up and make sure that varying voices are heard, I would encourage you to make sure that you're stepping up and you're asking intentionally that other people are at the table. When you do that, then you're able to hear the varying voices in terms of preservation, right? In terms of making sure that it's an inclusive environment for all. So 10 years from now, in terms of preservation, hopefully we're hearing stories of more sites that are more sites being preserved that represent the African-American culture, more sites being preserved that represent Native culture, more sites being preserved that tell the full story of what it means to be Americans in our country. But that only happens when we begin to be intentional about making sure that we're filling some of these positions with varying voices when we have the opportunity to do so. I am wrapping up, you all, and we have a few more slides left. We oftentimes don't get things because we deserve it. We get things because we have the courage to do so. That afternoon with my mom, I don't know if I necessarily deserved to be pulled to the front, but my mom had the courage to pull me to the front of the auditorium, the cafetorium space. So long after it feels possible, when your building burns to nothing, when you feel like nobody else is able to help you, when you feel like you're all alone, do you have the courage to do what it takes to continue to preserve? Do you have the courage to do what it takes to continue to share your voice, even when you're nervous, even when you're scared? Can you do it anyway? The institutions and the groups and the voices of the stories we tell do not belong to us. We are merely sowing seeds. We're given these seeds, and it is our job when these seeds are placed in our hand to sow them, to sow them, to sow them. The more we sow seeds, the more chances and opportunities we have, and know that these seeds will be sowed and planted in good soil so that we're able to continually share these stories. I'm so fortunate that over 20 years ago, my boss saw me as a seed and she sowed it. And I am consistently sowing it now with the museum, but I'm also sowing it with my family. I'm sowing it with my daughter. My husband and I consistently sow these seeds because we realize that it's not just about us. It's about our families, it's about our institutions, and it's about our teams. The sun does not ask permission. It simply is, and it exists. One of the things that I have learned in over 20 years of doing this work is what it means to be very self-aware. It means being authentic with who you are and knowing that you deserve to be in the space that you're in, taking up that space, but also inviting others along for the journey, not forgetting those who got you to where you are. Making sure that you're leaving way for personal and professional growth and development. Making sure that I'm providing a space for others, for young people to grow and develop in the space of preservation as well. Some of the areas that have been full circle moments for me that I will absolutely always remember is our first director, Constance Sarto, and the work that she did, and getting a chance to put a hard hat on myself and do the same work. She helped to work to preserve and open the original building. I'm so fortunate to be able to do the work to have a grand opening over 15 years later. I was fortunate to bring the Preservation Society together last year for our grand reopening. My team and I pulled together those who preserved the space in the beginning. And then we started a top 15 trailblazers, those who are really movers and shakers around the state of Arkansas, those who are doing the work of preserving, interpreting, and celebrating Arkansas's African-American history to make sure that the legacy of the Preservation Society is not forgotten. And so the picture that we see to it's probably my right, your left, is that. And then one of the photos that I cherish the most from this previous year were all of the directors of the Mosaic Templars. Because I would not be here without them. And so again, it's very important to me to make sure that I always save space for those who came before me. And I'm so honored that each of them came to the grand reopening for me because I asked them to. So let's not forget to continue to save space for those who do the work, to say their names, our ancestors, because they matter and they are important. So what is next for Mosaic Templars? We are working on the outside of our building, but the outside and the revitalization of 9th Street. Intentional placemaking is so very important. And so we are doing the research and seeing what's happening in other cities in Mississippi and Oklahoma. And we're excited to continue to do the work and to work on grant money to revitalize 9th Street. We're excited that the city of Little Rock has placed 9th Street in its master plan in terms of what the city looks like in the next 25 years. So it is my goal and vision to continue to work with the leaders and community of 9th Street and the community of Little Rock to continue to build and develop 9th Street so that it is a place that is remembered for its historic legacy, the treasures that it holds, and so that our children will have a space that they can be proud of 25, 30 years from now. It's not about the goals that you set, but it's about the systems that you put in place to continue to make sure that we are rising to the level of our expectations of those who've gone before us. I truly believe that starting my work at Cane River Creole National Historic Site, an antebellum era plantation, was really a way for me to connect with the history and heritage at the very foundation of our country, so that I was able to move it forward today to 2024. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Rachel, for having me.
Thank you so much, Key, for your excellent program. Okay, great. All right, so everybody can see us better now. We have some questions for you. Oh, and before the questions, some people sent me private messages earlier, so I wanted to make sure everybody knew the 3 winners who I will pass their email addresses along to Key after this were Blake Wintry, Janelle Prim, and Kim Davis for correctly identifying Bass Reeves, Angela Davis, and Julian Bond on the slide earlier. So I'll pass that info along to Key, and congrats to y'all. And now let me start here. A question from Carolyn Kent. At one time, there was a list of Mosaic Templars tombstones on the front of the website where a person could check the names and add names. Is there some way to use this list now?
So because we've gone through several iterations of the site, we do still have the information, but it's no longer on the website. So if she wants or needs it, we can share with her the list, but it's not on the website anymore.
Okay. From Angie Albright, what do you think has stuck with you the most about working for the National Park Service?
That's a good one, Angie. I will honestly say I think it's interpretation. I think it's Friedman Tillman's interpretation and how to connect people to space through stories, right? Through hearing people's stories, through using living examples and documents. So I think definitely the art of interpretation, the art of storytelling, I think has probably stuck with me most because people tend to connect more with stories. And while we love the objects and we love to talk to people, they love to connect objects to stories and place. And so I think how to really pull people in through using objects and stories and firsthand accounts of people's experiences.
Let's see. And does Mosaic Templars have an online catalog that students can use for research?
We do not have an online catalog, but if we have students reach out to us all the time doing research. Some of them come into the space, some of them some of them come into the space and do research. So while we don't have anything online, we always welcome students to email us and we can make sure that we get them connected.
Okay, thank you. If anybody else has a question, you've got a few minutes to type it in the Q&A or in the chat. And I'll just ask, how can people make sure that they don't miss out on anything that Mosaic Templars is doing? Do y'all have a newsletter or social, or what should they do to keep up to date with what's happening?
I think the best way is to visit definitely our Instagram or Facebook, but also our website. And if you get a chance, stopping by the museum, but social, that's that continuous, it's consistently being updated, but also our website. But give us a call as well. We're always willing to talk to people. And also, I think connecting with school groups and churches and other organizations, we go throughout the state for absolutely free. So if you've got a preservation society, if you've got a fraternal organization, if you've got a school, you've got, any organization that wants to hear the story, we definitely will travel. And so that's also a way to keep connected.
Thank you, Key, so much.
You're welcome. Thanks, Rachel, for having me.
Sure. I appreciate your program so much and your perspective. And I mean, that's really what you've said about interpretation and about the conversation about the importance of place. It's so relevant to the work that we do. And I mean, that's why we do the work we do. At least that's the reason why we do it, to preserve Arkansas. I mean, it's not to just preserve a building. It's all about the stories of the people who were associated with that place. So thank you. And I look forward to all the awesome plans that are going to come to fruition on 9th Street. That's so great. Very exciting. And thank you again. And thank you everybody for watching.